In the shadow of cathedrals and castles, beneath stained glass windows and stone spires, the Middle Ages held a dark truth, one rarely spoken, never taught, and almost always hidden behind veils of piety. For pregnant women, especially those without husbands, the medieval world was not a sanctuary, it was a tribunal. Their wombs were seen not as vessels of life, but as evidence of sin. At the heart of this cruelty lay the ordeal, gruesome physical tests designed to extract divine judgment. If the church could not find proof of innocence or guilt, God would decide. And so, women were marched to boiling cauldrons and glowing irons, not criminals, but mothers-to-be. One such ordeal was known throughout Carolingian Europe and canon law, the ordeal of boiling water. A woman suspected of adultery or fornication was ordered to plunge her hand into scalding water to retrieve a ring or stone. Her hand would be wrapped and sealed for 3 days. If it healed without infection, she was innocent. But if it festered, she was guilty and condemned. It was a cruel test, more superstition than justice, and one especially deadly for the pregnant. The shock and injury led many to miscarriage or death, and yet this was accepted as divine will. If a woman lost her child, it was not a tragedy. It was a sentence carried out by the hand of God. Another ordeal, equally horrifying, involved walking a set distance while gripping a red-hot iron bar. The wounds were again bound, left to heal, or not. A clean recovery was vindication. But should blisters or rot appear, the punishment would follow swiftly: flogging, exile, or even lifelong confinement. In these cases, the outcome never truly belonged to the woman. Her innocence was not proven by truth, but by fire, infection, and silence. The system was not built to protect. It was built to condemn. Imagine a woman, young, trembling, and pregnant, tied to a wooden post in the village square. A crowd gathers. The air is heavy, silent. Then the executioner lifts a red-hot branding iron. One motion, and the mark is seared into her cheek or forehead. The accusation, adultery or fornication, is now branded into her flesh. This was not a nightmare. This was policy in parts of France, Germany, and the Holy Roman Empire. Customary laws in regions like Normandy and Brittany allowed public branding for women who conceived outside marriage. Their crime was visible, and so the punishment had to be permanent. These laws weren't invented in isolation. They borrowed from ancient Rome, where enslaved and lower-class women were often branded as punishment for so-called moral failings. In medieval Europe, that legacy of physical shame lived on. In England, branding was less common, but public penance remained. A woman found pregnant outside marriage might be paraded through the streets barefoot, wrapped in a white sheet with a rope around her neck, forced to confess aloud as townsfolk watched in silence. Court records from York, Ely, and Exeter show how these rituals were used to humiliate women and reinforce the church's authority. Flagellation or public whipping began in monasteries as self-punishment, but by the 12th century, it had spread into courts. A woman whose pregnancy revealed her sin could be whipped as penance. The church defended it as a mercy. Bodily suffering, they said, was a path to salvation. Theologians like Peter Damian even compared the practice to the scourging of Christ. But for the women, it was anything but holy. Their punishment was not just physical. It was moral, social, and spiritual. It was meant to cleanse, but it only scarred. Pregnant women bore a double burden. Their bodies were punished, and they were condemned for corrupting both themselves and the unborn. In a society built on rigid moral codes, forbidden pregnancy was met not with compassion, but with the lash. Even religious women were not spared. When a nun became pregnant, it was seen as a grave violation of her vows. Many were confined to monastic cells for life. Silence, cold, and isolation replaced lashes. But the punishment was just as severe. The Gregorian reforms of the 11th century had strengthened church control over morality. And so women, whether nuns or simply from respectable families, were locked away to hide their shame and prevent scandal. In regions like northern France and Flanders, even lay women were sometimes placed in convents until childbirth. Not for protection, but to erase their presence from public life. In some cases, after birth, their children were sent to orphanages or religious institutions, never knowing the identity of their mothers. These confinements weren't formal prison sentences, but they served the same purpose. They silenced, they erased, and they made the woman's body invisible once again. But sometimes, even isolation was not enough. In rural villages across late medieval Europe, banishment became the final blow. If a woman was visibly pregnant without a husband, she might be exiled from her community without trial. A directive from the parish priest or village elder could end her entire existence. Leave and do not return. To be banished was to become a ghost, forgotten, rejected, and condemned to wander. In England, court rolls from Norfolk and Suffolk record such cases. A woman carrying an illegitimate child was not just shamed, she was erased. Exile served as more than punishment. It was moral cleansing. The woman's body, now seen as tainted, had no place among the God-fearing. Out of sight meant out of memory, and out of memory meant out of mercy. Through boiling water and burning iron, through lashes, cells, and exile, medieval society punished women not for crimes, but for carrying life in the wrong way. These women were not protected by law or shielded by the church. They were judged, tormented, and cast out by both. All of it was done in the name of honor, of purity, of divine order. But behind every scar, every brand, and every exile, there was fear, not just fear of sin, but of a woman who could not be controlled. Today, these stories still echo in debates about morality, justice, and bodily autonomy. They remind us how power uses punishment to silence vulnerability, and how often it is women who are made to bear the weight. Because in the Middle Ages, one truth was clear: the body of a pregnant woman was never her own.